In the autumn of 1885, when the leaves of the Appalachian Mountains turned crimson and gold, a peculiar silence had settled over the remote hollow where the Caldwell family made their home. It was not the comfortable quiet of rural isolation, but something far more profound and unsettling, a silence born of unspeakable grief and generations of whispered secrets that dared not be spoken aloud in the light of day. The Caldwell homestead stood like a weathered sentinel against the backdrop of ancient peaks, its log walls darkened by decades of mountain storms and the smoke from countless winters. To the occasional traveler who might stumble upon this forgotten corner of Kentucky, the sight would seem unremarkable, another family eking out their existence in the harsh beauty of Appalachia. But those who knew the history of this place, those few souls brave enough to venture close, would notice something that chilled them to the bone, the absence of children's laughter, echoing through the hollow. For nearly a century, the Caldwell name had been spoken in hushed tones throughout the surrounding valleys, always accompanied by the sign of the cross and a prayer for protection. The locals in the nearest settlement, a day's hard ride through treacherous mountain paths, knew better than to ask too many questions about the family on Widow's Peak. They had learned, through bitter experience and cautionary tales passed down through generations, that some knowledge was too dangerous to possess. The curse that plagued the Caldwell lineage had its roots in the mists of time, somewhere in the wild years following the Revolutionary War, when the first Ezekiel Caldwell had claimed this isolated parcel of mountain land. According to the brittle pages of a journal discovered years later, in the ruins of a burnt cabin, Ezekiel had arrived in these mountains fleeing something far worse than poverty or the law. The entries, written in a trembling hand that grew increasingly erratic with each passing month, spoke of bargains made in desperation and prices paid in blood and sorrow. "The land is mine now," wrote Ezekiel in his final coherent entry, dated October 31st, 1792. "The old woman's bones rest beneath the hearthstones, and her words echo still in the wind that howls through the gaps. She promised me prosperity, promised me that my line would endure until the mountains themselves crumble to dust. But every blessing carries its burden, and every gift demands its payment. The firstborn must return to the earth from whence all life springs. This is the covenant I have made, and this is the legacy I leave to those who carry my name." By the winter of 1885, this legacy had claimed 17 souls, 17 firstborn children, who had vanished without trace before their 10th birthday. The pattern was as predictable as the changing seasons, and as inexorable as death itself. Each generation of Caldwells would welcome their first child with a mixture of joy and dread, knowing that their happiness was borrowed time, that the shadow of the curse would eventually come to collect what it considered its due. Sarah Caldwell, great-great-granddaughter of the cursed Ezekiel, stood at her kitchen window on that fateful autumn morning, watching her son Thomas play among the fallen leaves. At 8 years old, the boy possessed the wild beauty common to all Caldwell children: dark hair that caught the light like ravens' wings, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a smile that could charm the birds from the trees. But Sarah's maternal heart carried no peace as she watched him, for she knew that time was running short. The signs had begun to manifest 3 months earlier, just as they always did in the approach to a taking. The animals had grown restless, refusing to venture near the house after sundown. The well water had taken on a metallic taste that no amount of boiling could purify. Most troubling of all, Thomas had begun to speak of the woman in white who visited him in his dreams, a beautiful lady who promised to show him wonders beyond imagining if only he would come away with her to a place where children never grew old and never felt pain. Sarah's husband, Marcus, had tried to maintain his skepticism, clinging to rational explanations as a drowning man clings to driftwood. He spoke of coincidence and superstition, of the need to break free from the chains of ancestral fear that had bound their family for too long. But in the dark hours before dawn, when the mountain winds carried sounds that seemed almost like children's voices, calling from the depths of the hollow, even Marcus would cross himself and whisper prayers learned at his grandmother's knee. The local preacher, Reverend Hosea Whitman, had made the journey to the Caldwell homestead on 3 separate occasions, armed with holy water and determination to break what he firmly believed to be a spiritual bondage. A tall, gaunt man with eyes that burned with righteous fervor, Whitman had spent his entire ministry battling what he saw as the devil's hold on the mountain people. The Caldwell curse represented in his mind the ultimate challenge to his faith and his calling. "This evil has no power that cannot be overcome by prayer and fasting," he had declared during his first visit, his voice echoing through the simple main room of the cabin. "The Lord's mercy is infinite, and no curse can stand against the blood of the Lamb." But his confidence had wavered with each subsequent encounter, particularly after the night he had spent in vigil over young Thomas, only to wake at dawn to find the boy standing in the doorway, his eyes reflecting a light that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the mortal world. The Reverend's journal, discovered years later among his personal effects, told a different story than his public pronouncements of faith, triumphant. "There is something in that house," he wrote in an entry dated September 15, 1885, "something that watches from the shadows and whispers in languages that predate the Tower of Babel. I have felt its presence like ice water in my veins, and I fear that my prayers are as ineffective against this ancient evil as a candle flame against a mountain storm. God forgive me, but I begin to understand why the Caldwell family has never truly fought against their fate. Some battles cannot be won by mortal hands, no matter how strong their faith." As October deepened and the first frost silvered the mountain peaks, the manifestations around the Caldwell homestead grew more frequent and more disturbing. Visitors reported seeing lights dancing through the forest that surrounded the property, not the warm glow of lanterns or torches, but cold phosphorescent illumination that seemed to pulse with malevolent intelligence. The local Cherokee, whose ancestral lands had once encompassed this region, spoke in whispers of the White Woman of the Hollows, a spirit that had walked these mountains since time immemorial, collecting the young to feed some hunger that mortal minds could not comprehend. Joseph Blackhorse, an elderly Cherokee medicine man who lived in a cabin near the valley's mouth, had known the Caldwell family since his youth and had witnessed 3 of the previous takings. His weathered face bore the weight of too much knowledge as he spoke to those brave enough to seek his counsel. "The white settlers," he would say in his careful English, "they do not understand the old agreements. They think they can take from the land without giving in return, that they can make bargains with spirits whose nature they cannot fathom. The woman in white is older than the mountains themselves, and her hunger is eternal." The first Caldwell awakened something that should have remained sleeping, and now his bloodline pays the price for his arrogance. While we delve deeper into this enigma, I invite you to share your own theories in the comments below and join our community of explorers of the unknown by subscribing to the channel. The mystery of the Caldwell curse has puzzled investigators and storytellers for generations, and perhaps together we can uncover truths that have remained hidden in the shadows of these ancient mountains. Sarah Caldwell had spent countless sleepless nights poring over her family's records, desperate to find some clue that might save her son from the fate that had claimed so many before him. The family Bible, its leather binding cracked with age and its pages yellow as autumn leaves, contained not only the usual genealogical records, but also margin notes written by generations of desperate parents. These annotations, scribbled in shaking hands by mothers and fathers facing the loss of their children, painted a picture of a family trapped in a cycle of supernatural predation from which there seemed to be no escape. "Tried salt circles around Margaret's bed," read one note dated 1834. "No effect. The dreams continue." Another from 1851 was even more heartbreaking. "Iron charms hidden in William's clothes found them twisted into unrecognizable shapes come morning. The boy grows paler by the day." Most disturbing of all was a series of entries made by Sarah's own grandmother, Catherine Caldwell, during the disappearance of her firstborn, David, in 1862. "The woman comes to him nightly now," Catherine had written. "I see her shadow by his bedside, hear her voice like silver bells calling him away from us. She promises him freedom from the war, from hunger, from all the sorrows of this world. How can a mother's love compete with such promises? How can flesh and blood stand against something that offers the infinite?" The final entry in Catherine's hand was dated October 31st, 1862. "David is gone. Found his nightclothes folded neatly at the foot of his bed, still warm as if he had just removed them. No footprints in the frost, no sign of struggle. He went willingly, as they all do in the end. The woman keeps her promises, in her fashion. My boy will never know pain again, never face the hardships of this world. But my heart is broken, and I understand now why so many Caldwell women have walked into the forest and never returned. The living carry burdens that the taken never will." Marcus Caldwell had initially dismissed these records as the ravings of grief-stricken minds, But as the manifestations around his own son intensified, he began to see them in a different light. The patterns described by his ancestors matched exactly what he was witnessing in his own home. The cold spots that appeared without explanation, always in Thomas's vicinity. The way animals fled from the boy's presence, not in fear but in recognition of something that didn't quite belong to the natural world. Most unnerving of all, the change in Thomas himself, the way he would sometimes stare into empty corners of the room as if carrying on silent conversations with invisible companions. The boy had always been precocious, but in recent weeks his knowledge seemed to extend far beyond what any 8-year-old should possess. He spoke casually of events that had occurred before his birth, demonstrated familiarity with places he had never visited, and sometimes lapsed into languages that neither Sarah nor Marcus recognized. When questioned about these strange episodes, Thomas would look at them with eyes that seemed far older than his years and smile a smile that chilled them to the bone. "She teaches me things," he would say when pressed for explanations. "She shows me how the world really works, beneath all the pretending that grown-ups do. She says I'm special, that I was chosen long before I was born. She says I shouldn't be sad about leaving you because where she's taking me is much better than here." Dr. Ezekiel Morrison, the circuit doctor who served the mountain communities, had examined Thomas on several occasions at his parents' desperate request. Morrison was a practical man, educated at a respectable medical college, and armed with the latest scientific knowledge of his time. He arrived at the Caldwell homestead, prepared to diagnose some form of childhood malady or psychological disturbance. What he found instead challenged every assumption he had made about the nature of reality itself. "The child appears physically healthy," he wrote in his medical notes, which were later discovered among his papers. "His vital signs are normal, his appetite good, his development appropriate for his age. Yet there is something profoundly unsettling about the boy that I cannot quantify or explain in medical terms. His pulse sometimes skips beats in patterns that seem almost rhythmic, as if responding to some unheard music. His body temperature fluctuates without cause, dropping several degrees below normal before returning to baseline. Most disturbing of all, he occasionally seems to cast no reflection in mirrors, though this phenomenon is so brief that I question my own observations." Morrison's clinical skepticism crumbled entirely during his final visit to the homestead, 3 days before Thomas's disappearance. He had brought with him a colleague from Lexington, Dr. Benjamin Crawford, hoping that a second opinion might shed light on the boy's condition. Instead, both physicians found themselves witnesses to manifestations that defied every principle of medical science they had ever learned. "We observed the child engaged in conversation with an entity that neither Dr. Crawford nor I could perceive," Morrison wrote in his most detailed account of the incident. "The boy's responses indicated that he was receiving complex communications from this invisible presence. At one point he turned to us and said quite matter-of-factly, 'She says you both smell like fear and disbelief, and that's why you can't see her properly.' When we pressed him to describe this she he spoke of, he provided details that matched exactly the descriptions found in the family's historical records. A tall woman dressed in white, with silver hair and eyes like winter moonlight, who moved without making sound and left no footprints in her wake. The two doctors had planned to remain at the homestead overnight, hoping to observe the child during the hours when the phenomena seemed most active. Neither man completed their vigil. Both fled into the mountain darkness sometime after midnight, driven by terror they could neither understand nor explain. Crawford never spoke publicly of what he had witnessed, but Morrison's private correspondence reveals fragments of the experience that haunted both men for the remainder of their lives. "She came for him while we watched," Morrison confided to a colleague in a letter dated November 15, 1885. "Not in any manner that mortal eyes could fully comprehend, but we knew she was there. The temperature in the room plummeted until our breath came in visible clouds. The shadows seemed to move independently of any light source, reaching toward the boy like grasping fingers. And Thomas, dear God, Thomas began to change before our eyes. Not physically, but somehow essentially. It was as if his very soul was being drawn from his body, pulled towards something we could not see, but could feel with every fiber of our being." If you're fascinated by these hidden secrets of history, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming investigations. The truth behind the Caldwell curse has eluded explanation for generations, but perhaps with your help and engagement, we can piece together the fragments of this impossible puzzle. The final week of October 1885 brought unseasonably cold weather to the Appalachian Mountains, and with it, a sense of impending doom that seemed to settle over the Caldwell homestead like a shroud. Sarah had barely slept in days, maintaining constant vigil over her son while Marcus patrolled the property with his rifle, though both parents knew that no earthly weapon could protect them from what was coming. Thomas himself seemed eerily calm during these final days, as if he had already accepted his fate and made peace with it in ways that his parents never could. He spent his daylight hours in seemingly normal childhood activities, playing with carved wooden toys, helping his mother with simple chores, following his father around the property as Marcus completed his daily rounds. But as evening approached, the boy would undergo a subtle transformation that filled his parents with dread. His eyes would take on a distant quality, as if he were seeing things far beyond the confines of their mountain cabin. He would speak less to his parents and more to empty air, carrying on conversations in hushed tones with companions that only he could perceive. Most heartbreaking of all, he would sometimes look at Sarah and Marcus with an expression of profound pity, as if he understood something about their situation that they themselves could not grasp. "Don't be sad for me," he told his mother on the evening of October 29th, his small hand reaching up to touch her tear-stained cheek. "She's shown me where I'm going, and it's beautiful there. No one is ever hungry or cold or afraid, and I won't be gone, not really. I'll be watching over you and Papa, just like all the others watch over their families. We never really leave, Mama. We just go somewhere different." The local community, such as it was in that isolated region, had been aware of the approaching crisis for weeks. Word traveled slowly through the mountain settlements, carried by traders and traveling preachers who spoke in whispers of the curse that was about to claim another victim. Some brave souls had even made the journey to the Caldwell property, hoping to offer assistance or comfort to the doomed family. All had departed hastily, driven away by phenomena they could neither understand nor endure. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, whose own homestead lay 15 miles south through dangerous mountain passes, had been one of the few to maintain contact with Sarah during those final weeks. Her letters, preserved in the County Historical Society, provide a glimpse into the emotional state of a mother facing the unthinkable loss of her child. "Sarah grows more haggard by the day," Mrs. Hartwell wrote to her sister in Virginia. "The poor woman has aged 10 years in as many weeks. She speaks constantly of taking Thomas and fleeing to some distant place where the curse cannot reach them, but Marcus has convinced her that such attempts are futile. The family history shows that those who have tried to escape their fate have only brought tragedy to others. The curse follows the bloodline wherever it goes, and innocent people have died when the Caldwells have attempted to break the pattern. Indeed, the family records contain several accounts of such failed escape attempts. In 1843, Jonathan Caldwell had taken his firstborn daughter, Mary, and fled to Ohio, hoping that distance would protect her from the supernatural forces that plagued his lineage. Mary had disappeared from a locked room in a Cincinnati boarding house, vanishing so completely that no trace of her was ever found. But her disappearance had been preceded by a series of mysterious deaths in the boarding house. Other children who had been found in their beds, apparently peacefully dead with no signs of illness or injury, their faces wearing expressions of beatific serenity. The pattern had repeated in 1867, when Samuel Caldwell had attempted to break the curse by placing his son, Robert, in the care of distant relatives in Pennsylvania. Robert had vanished from a heavily guarded room, but not before 6 other children in the household had succumbed to what the local physician had described as an inexplicable failure of the vital functions. The relatives had survived, but they bore psychological scars that lasted for the remainder of their lives, speaking in whispers of white shadows and children's voices that called from empty rooms. These tragedies had taught the Caldwell family a bitter lesson. Their curse was not merely their own burden to bear. Attempts to evade their fate inevitably resulted in the deaths of innocents, as if the supernatural force that claimed their firstborn children would not be denied its due and would take substitute victims if necessary. This knowledge had condemned generations of Caldwell parents to passive acceptance of their children's fate, making them complicit in a cycle of tragedy that seemed to have no end. On the night of October 30th, 1885, Sarah made one final desperate attempt to save her son. Armed with information she had gleaned from her grandmother's journals, she prepared what she believed might be a protective ritual that could shield Thomas from the supernatural predator that stalked her family. The ritual, described in cryptic terms in Catherine Caldwell's writings, involved the creation of a circle of sanctified earth around the boy's bed, blessed by clergy from 7 different denominations and mixed with salt that had been consecrated at 3 different churches. Working by candlelight while Thomas slept and Marcus maintained his patrol outside, Sarah carefully constructed the protective circle according to her grandmother's instructions. She had spent weeks gathering the necessary components: holy water from Catholic, Methodist, Baptist, and Presbyterian churches, soil from 7 different graveyards, salt blessed by ministers of different faiths. The preparation had required her to travel throughout the mountain region, seeking assistance from clergy who regarded her with mixture of pity and fear. As midnight approached, Sarah completed her preparations and took her position beside Thomas's bed, determined to maintain vigil throughout the night that she knew would bring the final confrontation. The candles flickered in drafts that seemed to come from nowhere, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls that appeared to move independently of the flames that created them. The silence that settled over the homestead was absolute, as if the entire mountain was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Thomas awoke at the stroke of midnight, his eyes opening to reveal pupils that reflected the candlelight like mirrors. He sat up in bed with a fluid motion that seemed wrong somehow, too graceful for a sleepy child, and turned to look directly at his mother with an expression of infinite sadness. "She's here, Mama," he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies beyond normal human hearing. "She's been waiting so patiently, but she can't wait any longer. The compact must be fulfilled." Sarah felt the temperature in the room plummet, her breath forming visible clouds in air that had been warm moments before. The protective circle around Thomas's bed began to glow with a faint phosphorescence, the blessed components responding to the presence of something that existed beyond the natural world. For a moment, hope flared in Sarah's heart as the supernatural radiance seemed to form a barrier between her son and whatever force had come to claim him. But the protection proved as ephemeral as morning mist. The glow flickered and dimmed, the carefully prepared elements of the circle beginning to crack and crumble as if subjected to tremendous pressure. The blessed salt scattered like dust in a wind that touched nothing else in the room, and the sanctified earth lost its potency, reverting to ordinary soil in the space of heartbeats. "You cannot stand against her," Thomas said, though his voice had taken on qualities that no human throat could produce. "She is older than the mountains, older than the forests, older than the first people who walked this land. Your prayers and protections are like whispers against a hurricane." In the corner of the room, Sarah began to perceive a presence that her mind struggled to process. It was not quite a visual manifestation, not quite a shadow, but something that existed in the spaces between perception and reality. The White Woman of the Hollows had come to collect what she considered rightfully hers, and no mortal power could deny her. Thomas rose from his bed, his movements no longer entirely his own, drawn by an invisible force toward the presence that waited in the shadows. His nightclothes began to glow with the same ethereal light that had briefly protected his bed, as if he were being transformed into something that belonged more to the spirit world than to the realm of flesh and blood. "I love you, Mama," he said, and for a moment his voice was purely his own, filled with the innocence and affection of the little boy he had been. "Don't cry for me. I'm going somewhere wonderful, somewhere where I'll never be hurt or sad or afraid. And I'll be watching over you always, just like all the others watch over their families." The presence in the corner seemed to extend tendrils of concentrated darkness toward the boy, and as they touched him, Thomas began to fade, becoming translucent like morning fog touched by sunlight. Sarah lunged forward, desperate to grab her son and pull him back from the brink of whatever transformation was occurring, but her hands passed through him as if he were already more spirit than substance. In the final moments before Thomas vanished completely, Sarah thought she saw something that filled her with both terror and strange comfort. For just an instant, the shadows in the room seemed populated with other figures, small forms that might have been children, dozens of them, all watching with eyes that held love and sorrow in equal measure. The generations of Caldwell firstborn, who had been taken before Thomas, were there, she realized, gathered to welcome the newest member of their ghostly family, and then the room was empty, except for Sarah's sobbing and the echo of a child's laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Thomas was gone, claimed by the curse that had haunted his bloodline for nearly a century, but his disappearance carried with it a revelation that would change how the Caldwell family understood their tragic legacy. The veil of the past guards countless secrets, and together we can attempt to unveil them. Subscribe now to the channel to continue this journey, and leave your comment about which mystery you would like us to explore next. Your participation is what keeps these stories alive, and perhaps together we can shed light on truths that have remained hidden in the shadows of history for far too long. Marcus found his wife at dawn, seated beside their son's empty bed, staring at something only she could see. The protective circle had been reduced to scattered dust, and Thomas's nightclothes lay folded neatly at the foot of the bed, still warm, as if he had just removed them. But Sarah's face bore an expression that her husband had never seen before, not the devastation he had expected, but something resembling peace. "He's not gone," she whispered when Marcus knelt beside her. "Not really. They're all still here, all the children who were taken. They watch over their families, protect them from other evils. The curse isn't just about taking, it's about transformation, about creating guardians who exist between the worlds." In the weeks that followed Thomas's disappearance, strange phenomena began to occur around the Caldwell homestead that seemed to support Sarah's revelation. Travelers reported seeing lights in the forest that guided them safely through dangerous mountain passes. Wild animals that had previously threatened livestock began to avoid the Caldwell property entirely. Most remarkably, other supernatural threats that had long plagued the mountain communities seemed to retreat from areas near the family's land. The Cherokee medicine man, Joseph Blackhorse, visited the grieving family a month after Thomas's disappearance. His weathered face showed no surprise at Sarah's account of what she had witnessed in those final moments. "The white woman," he said quietly, "she does not take out of cruelty. She takes to transform, to create protectors for the living world. Your ancestors made a bargain they did not understand, but perhaps the price they pay serves a greater purpose than they knew." The Caldwell family's records show that subsequent generations approached the curse with a different understanding. While the loss of firstborn children continued with each generation, families began to report experiences that suggested their taken children remained present in some form, watching over their living relatives and protecting them from dangers, both natural and supernatural. Letters preserved in the County Historical Society describe instances where family members felt guided away from dangerous situations by invisible hands, where illness was miraculously cured overnight, where threats to the family's safety were mysteriously neutralized by unseen forces. The curse that had once seemed like pure evil began to reveal aspects that, while no less tragic, suggested a complex spiritual ecology that mortals could not fully comprehend. Sarah Caldwell lived for another 43 years after her son's disappearance, and her later writings show a woman who had found a way to coexist with unimaginable loss. She never had another child. Few Caldwell parents did after losing their firstborn, but she became a source of comfort and wisdom for other mountain families facing supernatural troubles. Her journals from this period speak of dreams where Thomas would visit her, appearing as he had at age 8, but with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. "He tells me of the others," she wrote in 1903, 18 years after his disappearance. 17 generations of Caldwell children who have joined the white woman's service, becoming guardians of the boundaries between worlds. They protect not just our family, but all who dwell in these mountains. The Cherokee were right. Some hungers serve purposes that the living cannot understand. The white woman feeds on innocence not to destroy it, but to preserve it forever, to transform it into something that can stand against the true evils that threaten our world. The last documented taking in the Caldwell family occurred in 1923, when young Elizabeth Caldwell vanished on her 9th birthday. But by then, the family had developed rituals and traditions that honored their lost children rather than simply mourning them. Elizabeth's disappearance was marked not with the desperate grief that had characterized earlier generations, but with a ceremony that acknowledged her transformation into something greater than mortal flesh could ever become. The Caldwell homestead stands empty now, abandoned sometime in the 1940s, when the last of the direct bloodline left the mountains for opportunities in distant cities. But local residents still report seeing lights in the windows during certain times of the year, and children's laughter sometimes echoes through the hollow on nights when the moon is dark and the mountain winds carry voices from the space between worlds. Modern investigators who have attempted to document the Caldwell curse have found physical evidence that defies explanation. Photographs taken in and around the abandoned homestead often reveal anomalous figures, small forms that appear translucent in the images, but were invisible to the naked eye at the time the pictures were taken. Electronic equipment malfunctions without cause, and visitors report feeling watched by benevolent presences that seem to encourage their research while simultaneously protecting them from darker forces that lurk in the mountain shadows. The curse that claimed 17 Caldwell children across nearly a century and a half remains one of the most thoroughly documented cases of supernatural predation in American folklore. But perhaps, as Sarah Caldwell came to believe, it was never truly a curse at all. Perhaps it was something far more complex, a supernatural conscription that transformed innocent children into eternal guardians, protecting the living world from threats that ordinary people could never hope to comprehend or combat. The White Woman of the Hollows continues to walk the Appalachian Mountains, according to local legend, but she is no longer seen as a malevolent spirit preying on the innocent. Instead, she has become something like a dark angel, gathering the pure of heart to serve in capacities that transcend mortal understanding. The Cherokee say that on certain nights, when the boundaries between worlds grow thin, you can still hear the voices of the taken children singing in languages older than human memory, their eternal vigil continuing in service to mysteries that will forever remain beyond the reach of living minds. The Caldwell family secret, it seems, was never really about a curse at all. It was about sacrifice, transformation, and the price that some bloodlines pay to maintain the balance between the world of the living and the realm of spirits that exists just beyond the veil of ordinary perception. In the end, perhaps Thomas and all the children who came before him found exactly what the White Woman had promised: freedom from pain, from fear, from all the sorrows of mortal existence, transformed into something eternal and infinitely precious in ways that no earthly parent could ever fully understand or accept.